If you are just joining us, welcome. My name is Gihan Hyde, and I am the founder and CEO of CommUnique. We basically solve 4 problems. We help you integrate sustainability and ESG within your business model. We help you communicate it effectively. We help you to train your employees on why is it important for you as an organization, but most importantly, why they should come with you in this journey as your employees. And finally, we help you to audit the effectiveness of your ESG initiatives. These live sessions are very short. They're called the Ask the ESG Experts. And in these weekly live sessions, what we do is we dissect an element within ESG and then we ask an expert on it. And this week is no different. With me today is Jon Barnes. Jon, thank you so much for joining us. For those of you who don't know you, can you please tell them about the wonderful work that you're doing?
Yeah, hi everyone. And thanks for having me, Gihan. Yeah, so I help organizations to create what I call adaptive organizations. So these are organizations that are able to shift shape basically as needed as they grow or as the world changes around them. And they're typically organizations that start to give team members an awful lot of autonomy in order to increase the speed and quality at which they work. So that's me.
When we first met and you said that to me, you said, yes, I help teams to be more autonomous, to be more empowered. I said, oh my God, that is such an interesting topic. We always talk about individuality within a team and accepting team members as they are and embracing their skill set. But it never occurred to me that there is a whole science behind it. So tell us more. So how, if I am a leader in an organization, how do I make sure that the team is autonomous and how do I empower them?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things that one can do. So typically the problem can be structural. So the silos, either vertically or horizontally, can have a big part to play in it. There's definitely also leadership styles that are more or less conducive to autonomy. That can come in 2 ways in my experience. One is an over-directing, because when we give someone constant direction, they have little opportunity to find their own direction. And another one is too much looking after, actually. I think sometimes we can be caring to a fault, and we're actually preventing somebody from going to grasp some responsibility or autonomy for themselves. So those are kind of, one is a slightly too fathering type of leadership, and one's a slightly too mothering type of leadership, and there's some balance to get between them, I think.
Oh gosh, I never thought of it that way. Fathering leadership style and a mothering leadership style. Okay, so do you have an example for us of how a fathering, for example, leadership style doesn't work?
Yeah, I mean, it might be helpful to, I define autonomy as freedom plus responsibility, or freedom times responsibility.
Okay.
So when we think of autonomy, we tend to think of the freedom part. Like I get to do whatever I want to do, right? That's the most extreme form. And I would describe that as freedom, but not autonomy. And the reason for that is that when I get to do whatever I want to do, it might feel great. I might be happy, but I'm not growing. I'm not doing good work. I'm just doing it's like a Peter Pan syndrome. And I think there is a form of leadership that's hyper caring that can really look after teams. And it's what we've missed historically, I think. I think it's a trend I see more and more. And that gives people all sorts of choice, but it can prevent them from really standing up and taking responsibility and being the best version of themselves. So I'd call that slightly mothering. The fathering, let's say, leadership style is all responsibility, no freedom. And I think we're more familiar with that. We're familiar with, let's say, autocratic bosses at their worst, maybe tyrannical bosses, where you do this and you do this in this time and it's all prescribed to you. There's a slightly oppressive feeling to that. And I think both have their value, and one without the other is missing something. So it's both of these things we're looking to kind of find the yin yang between, I think.
So when you enter an organization as their consultant, what do you do? Walk me through what you do, what are the changes that you help us to change? Because, for example, we're a startup and I don't know my style. I think I'm a mix between fathering and mothering, and sometimes I'm actually so just do your thing. I'm always that way inclined. If you have an idea, go run with it, and then tell me if it's working, and tell me how this idea affects my growth. So when you do come into organization, what do you do? How do you change this mindset of this type of leadership?
First of all, that sounds like you're doing great.
The team. How about that? One of them, so later on ask them.
Well, I mean, there's a few things to say. One is giving someone autonomy doesn't mean doing nothing. That's neglect, right?
Okay.
Giving someone autonomy is giving them both freedom and responsibility, and then being there to coach when somebody falls over so that they learn to get back up themselves. It's learning to mitigate risks so that we're learning and trying within some sort of safe parameter, safe to the person, but also safe to the organization to mitigate for risk. So those things I think are really key. Typically, the problem amongst leaders is a difficulty in letting go at first. And you'll find it's often the leaders who are most overwhelmed with work, no surprise, right? So that makes sense because decision making tends to do this thing where it floats up the chain, right? So there's loads of people at the bottom and their decisions are floating up as they ask the bosses for permission. And that's a relationship that we can have to hierarchy where, because we're always asking for permission and hierarchy tends to always respond with answers, then we just keep going around that cycle and everything floats up to the top, which is very tiring. So one thing is to try and help leaders to no longer give the answers to everything, but rather to coach back, to act as coaches, right? So if you ask me a question, for me to ask a question back for you to figure it out. I think that's a really key thing to do. The way I help organizations is typically the first thing is I listen. All organizations are very different. People inside the organization have different views of the organization. I certainly can't just take a leader's word for it. And there's limits to self-awareness. I can't be aware of how self-aware I am because I'm limited by my own self-awareness, right? So I do need other perspectives. Then the next stage is to help the group to self-identify ways in which this organization can improve. So that's different from the leaders identifying those problems. The groups start to identify them. And then maybe most key, this is the big shift, is when a group of people start to take responsibility for improving it. So it's no longer a complaint system in a survey where we're asking people higher up than us to make the business better in this way or that way. It's we identify our problems and we jump in to start to experiment with new solutions. So that's where responsibility starts getting shared. At this point, I have a ton of kind of different tools and models and theories in my backpack, ranging from restructuring to culture change to specific processes or tools that can help teams to work with a different rhythm, ranging from meetings to decision making to structural changes. But they come out as a response to having heard something rather than being imposed up front.
And what would be the risk then if we don't apply autonomy in the right way?
Yeah, oh, well, I'm not aware of much risk. I'm not aware of much risk of giving autonomy. I mean, there's definitely a stupid form of
lack of autonomy.
Of lack of autonomy, yeah. I mean, the opportunity cost is massive. I mean, actually, maybe let me just share a brief story with the audience in case this brings it to life.
Oh yes, please.
My grandmother is 100 years old and wonderful, and she stayed with me last year. And unfortunately, she's also 100 years old. And next door, I heard her fall, right? So I heard her I heard her hit the ground on the floorboards next door. I went to see her. She wasn't doing too good. She had a big cut. So we called the ambulance. Right? Exactly. And then the paramedics come and they're super kind and helpful and loving. But ultimately, they said to us, I'm sorry, I can't stitch her back up because I'm worried I'm going to get sued. So they take us to the hospital. We go to the hospital. And at this point, it's a cascade of nonsense. We spent all night in hospital. She didn't sleep all night, 7-8 hours. And we just saw nurse after nurse after nurse. And they're just delaying us until eventually we see a doctor 7 or 8 hours later. And the doctor just puts a few stitches, took like 5-10 minutes, and then said, you can go home. Now, when we look at this situation, how it escalated and escalated, the reason it happened is because the paramedic knew exactly what to do, had all the skills, was well educated, was caring and loving, and could have just done his job there and then, but he was almost not allowed to because of this hierarchical system. So as a result, the cost was that the ambulance made a trip back to hospital. We used a hospital bed all night. We probably saw 5 nurses. Eventually we saw a doctor. That doctor probably saw 100 people that night. So the human cost is used. We've just seen 6 people instead of 1. The financial cost is that we've seen 6 people instead of 1, and we've used the bed and equipment all night long. The engagement cost is huge because the paramedic can't even just do his job. It was a simple thing that he wanted to do to help my grandma, and he couldn't. So that's very disempowering and disengaging for him. And it's incredibly tiring for all the nurses and doctors who had to see her when actually she didn't need seeing. And then for her, at 100-year-old, not sleeping for a night is very bad for you. So the quality of care. So you've got low efficiency, high costs, low effectiveness, low customer value. And what could have happened is that the person nearest the customer, the paramedic, could have had the autonomy to do their job up to a certain risk threshold, right? It could be that if she was unconscious, that's a different rule. Then you go to hospital. But since she was conscious and it was a clear thing, that was okay. So the cost is massive. And we see that in our businesses all the time. The waste is in terms of repeated work, decision-making being slow, the customer not meeting a person that can actually make decisions. So the person who knows them best can't make the decisions on their behalf. And creativity or engagement because team members, this paramedic just wanted to do his job and he couldn't. And it must have been really annoying for him, to be honest.
And how's your grandma now?
Yeah, she's great.
Okay, good.
She's 101 very soon, and she's as funny as ever. So she's doing
all
right.
Did she get the letter?
Yeah, she got the letter from the Queen. Yeah, she got the letter from the Queen. Yeah.
No way. And how did it? Okay.
She got it a week before she passed, so I think she's really looking forward. She's actually got it up on the wall, and underneath there's a space because she's really hoping for the Kings this year.
Oh, the King also sends something after 101.
Yeah, you get it every year after a while, but it's the same letter apparently. They need to refresh it a bit.
No way. Okay, shout out to the palace. Can you please change your letters?
Yeah, I guess she'll get a new picture this year actually because it'll have the King on the front, so that's cool.
No, oh gosh. Oh, that is amazing. Well, please send our regards to her.
Thank you. Cheers.
It's interesting you say this about the paramedic because I was brought in to solve a problem in one of the financial institutions. And the reason I was brought in is because this financial institution went through a huge scandal, and the scandal almost lost them their operations completely. Share price fell, talent retention, acquisition stopped, everything. They really lost everything. And the reason why they almost lost their operation, and they're one of the biggest banks in the UK, is because the employees saw a wrongdoing taking place, but they didn't have the psychological safety or the mechanism and processes to speak up and highlight the problem, which resulted in the whole of the governance structure of the bank falling.
Yeah, wow.
And when I came in, my mandate was fix this. from a comms perspective, how do we get the employees more engaged? How do we get the employees to have the right psychological safety? And not even psychological safety, how do they get the mindset that governance and protecting the bank is the responsibility of everyone, starting from the top all the way to the bottom, and not just internal audit? And one of the ways we did that is by education, is by educating them the power of thinking for themselves and making decisions and not being afraid to make these decisions. So we've incorporated the governance mindset all the way from the interview process of an employee. We then, so through the questions that we were asking them to just understand, do they actually have an idea what governance actually mean? Do they know what to do or what they think they should be doing when there's a problem or when they see a problem? And then the next, we also incorporated it on the onboarding processes. So all of the e-learning modules, all of the workshops that we've done to when they're in a group, an induction group. So there was a lot of exercises around governance.
So you're working on both sharing the responsibility for that as well as the psychological safety so that they could speak up.
Exactly. And sometimes autonomy doesn't happen because the employees don't know what processes to follow as well.
And that real clarity of processes can really help for psychological safety as well. Actually, it's one of the things we talk about least often with psychological safety. You hear this kind of sense that it's the boss's job to make the room feel safe, and I think there's a lot of truth to that because a boss has a disproportionate amount of influence over the culture in the room. But there are other things. First of all, I can't actually really make someone feel safe. Like, it's possible that someone simply is insecure, and that growing as a human is the thing that's needed so that I feel safe, independent of circumstance. But some of these things are structural. Just really knowing what the rules of the game are and the processes to go through, that can give someone a bit of a relief. I know I'm doing the right thing.
Exactly. Yes, absolutely. And I think autonomy, like you just said, I think also autonomy needs to be clear what autonomy means. Because autonomy for me might mean differently for you. And
how do you go about that, making it clear?
How would you make it clear? Living and breathing it from the leadership team, showcasing what it means to be autonomous. Giving examples, humanizing autonomy. So telling stories about how employees and the leadership teams had to make a decision, a quick decision. Otherwise, the consequences would have been, not nice, basically. But I think if you humanize what autonomy means, if you humanize what because genuinely autonomy is governance, in my opinion.
I mean, there's a few that you can. I think of autonomy either from the collective lens. So you can think of a group of people being self-governing, whether that's a team or a region, actually, for that matter. A group can be self-governing, and that's one form of autonomy. But then there's an individual version of autonomy that's a lot harder to crack, which is that growing up, and I mean growing up not in terms of my age, but in terms of my psychological, intellectual, emotional, spiritual maturity, is a journey towards autonomy, is a journey towards having increasing agency over me, because I'm full of weirdness and quirks and insecurities and difficulties and failings and whatnot. And become autonomy in that sense is being able to self-govern in terms of John governing John. Can I govern my impulses? Can I govern my imposter syndrome? Can I govern my anger? And this is a version of autonomy that is, I think, far more critical, but because it's a lot, you can't draw a diagram that's going to describe how that's going to work. We underdo that. And the reason is, I think, because at school, typically in most didactic pedagogical education systems, you weren't allowed to govern the self at any point. You sat down, you did what you were told, you wore what you were told to wear in some cases. And so then bring adults into the workplace, and we tend to do the same. We want the teacher to tell us what to do. We follow the timetable, and we act like good boys and good girls. And really, it's time. I think we need to go and learn as adults what we should have been learning as children, which is, how do I have real authority over me? Because I'm out of control on some level, and my life is a journey towards certainly not having control, but having some purchase over Jon.
But that's very difficult for an organization to crack, though.
Possibly. I think there's two things, though. I think there's systems that help and hinder it. So I think there's environments, in my view, need to be free enough that you can explore, and yet safe enough that you don't get hurt. Right. So you should have an uncomfortable but safe degree of autonomy. Uncomfortable because I'm being given projects that are challenging, and I'm being said I can decide on certain things up to a certain threshold. That's an adventure, and adventures aren't all safe, right? A good adventure is not an adventure if it was totally safe, but it needs to be safe enough that I'm not damaging anyone else or myself. And if you put me in that environment repeatedly, I grow in autonomy. An example might be, right, a kid learning to cycle. Well, if you just put them on a bike, they'll fall over and possibly break a bone. And if you put them on a bike with stabilizers, they won't learn any balance. They've now got 4 wheels instead of 2. It's impossible to learn balance on 4 wheels. But there's these balance bikes, right? So there's these bikes without pedals. So the kid can flow and totally find their balance and just put a foot down for some safety occasionally. And that teaches balance way faster than either the bike, which is too chaotic, or the stabilizers, which are too safe. So I think we need to, both as leaders and in terms of our actual organizational processes, try and help people be in that sweet spot as much as possible. So you can do it with decision making. Up to a certain threshold, we give somebody in a team authority to do what they want. Above that threshold, so maybe it's an expensive decision they're going to make, or it has some big impact, then you have to ask colleagues for advice. Above that threshold, you have to ask them for consent, which might mean you ask the group, does anyone have any objections? And that's a way of giving someone max autonomy while still having these safety measures to mitigate for individual or collective risk.
I really like that. The example about the pedaling bike actually makes sense. It's interesting. My child actually learned without the pedaling bike, without the balance bike, without anything.
Yeah.
They just got in and boom, gone.
Yeah, great.
But that's an anomaly.
Way longer with the stabilizers, way longer.
Yeah.
And then it's up to you as a parent, right? You had to decide, how badly do I mind them hurting themselves?
Yes.
Because
for me, I don't mind at all, to be fair.
Right,
I don't
exactly.
know, maybe
no, but I agree. So if they hurt themselves badly, well, yeah, maybe that was a mistake. But if they don't hurt themselves at all, there's no growth. So there's, scraping of the knees, probably fine.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, what's the organizational version of that? As a leader, is someone too free and there's risk involved there that someone could get hurt, or is there too much control and actually there's just no growth? This person's not becoming who they can become, and they're not doing the work they could be doing right now if only you gave them the trust and autonomy to do so. And there's that sweet spot to find as a leader, I think.
Yeah, but it's also very, very difficult to apply in a large organizations with different cultures. For me, culture plays a huge part in defining what autonomy means.
Are you talking culture with a big C, like different cultures around the world, or are you talking organizational culture?
No. Different cultures around the world with the big. Is that what the big C is? Okay, the big
That's
C.
what I mean by a big C.
Yeah. Okay, so that's exactly the culture. I'm sure in some cultures, even if we do have the autonomy given to us in a silver plate, we will always go back to our bosses out of respect and say, what do you think of that?
Yeah.
But I don't know how an organization would be able to crack that unless they work as an organization, as a country, as a culture within a culture, if that makes sense. But no, I've seen how the lack of autonomy within teams results in missed opportunities. And I've also seen how lack of autonomy also results in reputational damage. From a comms point of view, it's a nightmare when we don't have the autonomy that we need, or we don't have the authority that we should be getting in challenging the data. So, for example, if we're given a data about the carbon initiative that the company has committed to, and they gave it to us to communicate it, the processes that we have to follow in order to make sure that the data is correct just makes it not even worth it after a certain time to even check the data if it's correct. And that's where greenwashing comes in. And this is where greenwashing comes in. Greenwashing, for those of you who are not aware of it, is when your organization is claiming that they're doing something regarding saving our planet, but in reality, they're not honest about how much they're doing. So they're hiding what they're doing or lying even. But greenwashing is the complete opposite. It's when you're doing great stuff and you have a lot of initiatives in place to save our people, planet, in an effective way, but you choose not to talk about it. You should not talk about it because you're so worried about being attacked around the data that you have. So 1 in 4 organizations around the world right now refuse to talk about how they're saving people and planet, even though they're doing it, and they're doing it very well.
Right, that's interesting. And that's the fear of being picked up on the data they're sharing or not sharing. Is that right?
So the data, because the way ESG or environmental, social, and governance data is gathered, it varies from one organization to another. It varies from one country to another. So some are gathering it manually, some are gathering through a technological system. So some of the data will not be 100% accurate. And that's where greenwashing is coming in, whereby they don't want to feel attacked. They don't want to be attacked or scrutinized on their data.
Interesting.
So they choose not to talk about it.
You do make me think of something that relates really well to what we've been talking about, and that's transparency. So one reason somebody can't make good decisions is because they don't have the information, but they don't know what information they need because they don't know whether it exists or not. Like, stuff that I don't know that and yet I would benefit from it. So one thing that we do real quickly in organizations is open up some degree of transparency between teams. And that way you find a lot of things happen. First of all, we have way fewer meetings because I don't need an update. I know what's going on because we're working in public a lot. Then you see some other decreases in waste, which is that rather than doing some work, I actually realize someone else has already done it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And you can kind of get that wisdom of crowds thing. But then most importantly, because I have access to more information around the business, I'm now able to make decisions that are kind of a bit more holistic. They understand the broader picture. And there's one way of doing this. You can do this in a team. Ask everyone, if they're using Microsoft Teams, for example, open the app and ask everyone in the room to say how many teams they belong to.
Oh, gosh.
And I've done this and heard in a room someone say 3 teams and someone say 30. Well, if that's a 10-fold difference in the amount of information that you're exposed to. So it's like working in a different company. And it's exactly the same as the filter bubble situation we saw happen with the US elections in 2016, as well as Brexit, was that everyone's on Facebook thinking everyone agrees with them, only to realize there's all these people who have a different set of information. And you have that inside organizations all the time. It's the digital version of a silo. And simply joining one team or opening up teams to everyone makes a huge difference in terms of the quality and speed of decision making that happens.
Absolutely. No. I absolutely agree with you with that one. My God, John, we can talk about this for ages, for a long time. But no, I just wanted to thank you so much for your time today. I've learned a lot, to be fair. And if anything, you've left me thinking now how I can apply what you've just said in my own startup, and be aware of it for the future.
Is there something you can try?
I mean, I'm already giving them the autonomy. I think I just need to now focus on where is the threshold of making the decisions. When should they stop making any more decisions that could result in damaging our company from a monetary or from a reputational point of view? I think I just need to now work with the team to put in guidelines of what levels of autonomy or what levels of decisions each team can have and how much they can make it, especially because we're a client-facing agency.
Yes,
so
I'd ask the team to suggest those thresholds and then work with them on the details. And I'd recommend looking into consent-based decision-making, because that...
What does that mean?
It means that instead of we all agree, which basically we don't all agree, we just go around in circles for ages until we're all annoyed because it's taken ages and we have a rubbish idea. Consent means I propose something, I get advice from my team, I then edit and change my proposal, and then the group, I ask them, is this safe to try? And if it's not safe to try, if a single person says this isn't safe, I have to re-propose something safer. So what it means is the group self-regulates that threshold so that nothing can go really wrong. You know, you don't have to all love my idea, but you have to think that it's safe to try. And that means that I can carry on and move at speed and still have the authority to work whilst having the group just keep me safe.
Oh, I love that. Okay.
Give that a go.
Well, I will, and I'll report back. I will report back. But thank you everyone who have joined, and thank you for tuning in, and thank you, Jon. And by the way, if someone wants to get in touch with you, how do they do that?
Yeah, go to my website. Yeah, go to my website. I mean, DM me on LinkedIn, put a comment in, or go to my website, jonbarnes.me. That's JONBARNES.me. And I've got a few talks on there, as well as my recent book, Wilding Organizations, which you can get totally free.
Perfect. I look forward to it. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, and see you next week. Take care.